Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. As the largest infrastructure project in the nation's history, California's high-speed rail project has had some missteps, delays, and cost overruns. Recently, however, some of that's been changing. They've made some progress on securing the right-of-way, better control of third-party agreements, and a more realistic analysis of what's possible. One of the people that's given a lot of credit for that is our guest. He is the CEO of High Speed Rail Authority, Brian Kelly. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
So Brian, let me ask you this. Can you tell our audience what's the status of the project right now?
Well, the status is really one of progress and advancement. We are moving forward. Over the course of the last 2 years or so, we've tripled the number of structures that we have under construction. We're opening more and more guideway each week. We have about anywhere between 1,000 and 1,100 daily workers on 35 different job sites on the 119-mile segment in the Central Valley. And we're advancing the environmental work. In August, we'll bring to our board the first extension into LA County, which is the 80-mile from Bakersfield to Palmdale, mostly through the Tehachapi's. And so that's exciting for us. That means that nearly 300 miles of the Phase 1 system will be environmentally cleared this year. So we're excited about that, and we just keep driving the construction work in the Valley.
Yeah, one of the things that's impacted everyone has been COVID, right? I'm just wondering what impact has COVID had on high-speed rail?
It was a challenge. It remains a challenge, but it was a very difficult year for us in terms of, we really couldn't afford any additional setbacks, and we all had to adjust. So there were moments where we lost some schedule for sure, tied to just adapting to COVID rules and regulations, making sure we had strong safety elements at our construction sites. And we had moments where we had several workers and employees quarantined to deal with making sure we were containing the virus. And so just like every other industry, particularly the transit industry that was hit so hard, it did affect our program. But the nice thing is, while the state of California lost jobs during the height of the COVID pandemic, we were actually able to expand the number of workers on our job sites in the Valley.
Yeah, one of the things that people don't probably missed in all this is court closures. How did court closures impact high-speed rail?
Well, it was tough. We have sometimes during the condemnation process, the process of acquiring land we need for the project, we have sometimes very quick court processing things that we need to get done that typically take a day or two. However, at the height of COVID, with the court hours limited and in some cases closed, some of those things that usually take a day or two were taking a number of weeks. And so again, we did have some schedule impact from all of this, and that was just one area.
So we're coming out of COVID. That's great. But we've also got some other good news, I guess, for high-speed rail, and that is we've got Joe Biden in the White House, who's pretty passenger rail friendly. We also have a Democratic controlled Congress. I'm wondering, what does all of this mean for California's high-speed rail project?
Well, it's an amazing opportunity for us. I mean, I've been in this job for 3 years, and my entire stretch here was with the prior administration that was pretty hostile to the project, and attempted to take $1 billion away from the project, and really didn't want to see it advance. And it's nice to now be working with a true federal partner that is invested in the program and wants to see success. And so we're finding more and more opportunity to work closely with our federal partner. We've been in settlement discussions with them about the $1 billion that the prior administration was trying to take away, and we're feeling optimistic about our future and working with them.
Yeah, I think that's really where in some ways the rubber hits the road, as it were, with the $1 billion that the Trump administration was trying to claw back. You're now in settlement negotiations with the Biden administration to retain that money. So that's $1 billion. That's real money. Well,
Real money. Yeah.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to talk about the Bakersfield to Merced section, because that's the immediate focus for high-speed rail. Should it be viewed as a train to nowhere, or should the completion be considered part of the essential spine, a big chunk of the high-speed rail project? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. In his inaugural State of the State address, Governor Gavin Newsom called for refocusing the high-speed rail project on a 171-mile segment between Merced and Bakersfield, an area that he said had long been neglected by lawmakers. He also promised additional oversight and transparency of the project. Can the state deliver on this new, more immediate goal? And will it restore public confidence in the high-speed rail project from LA to San Francisco? We're talking with Brian Kelly, the CEO of the High-Speed Rail Authority. So, Brian, perhaps the biggest problem that we've seen with the high-speed rail project is dealing with the acquisition of property along the line. You can't build it if you don't own it. What is the plan to acquire those parcels between Merced and Bakersfield to make sure that segment's completed by 2029?
Well, the first thing is, on the 119-mile segment, which is a subset of that we are now in construction on, it's true that we've been a bit behind on the right-of-way, mostly because we got into construction a little bit too soon before we had all the right-of-way in hand. And much of my tenure here in the last 3 years has been about developing the strategies to get the right-of-way moving. We need about 2,300 parcels there to get that work done, and we're approaching 1,900 that we now have in hand. So we're now making quite good progress on the 119-mile stretch. And then one of the things we're doing differently going forward as we look to the Merced and Bakersfield extensions is that we're taking a more methodical approach. We're going to expand the design further first so we can identify the early right-of-way needs we have. And we'll get into right-of-way procurement well in advance of the construction segments. So we will not repeat the mistake of the past where we got out into construction before we had all the right-of-way in hand.
Yeah, that was well before your time. What they were doing was getting money until they had to spend it.
True.
And they didn't have the right-of-way already acquired, so that became kind of a problem that you've been dealing with. Let me ask you this, though. It's assumed that there is money to complete the Bakersfield to Merced segment, but that's based on several assumptions, and I kind of want to go over those. One of the assumptions is that legislators, particularly from Los Angeles and the Bay Area, aren't going to try to take that $4.1 billion for this segment and say, you know what, let's put it toward transit needs in our area. How likely is that to happen?
Well, I mean, that's the conversation we're having now. The governor, in his May revision of the budget, said clearly he's seeking the $4.2 billion appropriation. And let's be clear, this is an appropriation of bond dollars that are dedicated to building high-speed electrified rail in California. It's not for other diesel services or other services that are not part of this system. Our goal is to get the initial operating segment up and running as soon as possible. This is how you build transit systems in California. And ours is the fastest, cleanest train system anywhere in the country. And so the approach to use those bond dollars for this purpose is appropriate, totally in line with the bond bill and in line with what the voters asked us to do.
Yeah, and the fact that you have the governor in your corners, that's got to be a positive for sure for this project. Yeah. Let me ask, there's another assumption that's being made here, and that is that you're going to continue to see a robust market for cap and trade. And that's, a big chunk of money that's going toward 25%, I believe, of cap and trade is going to high speed rail. Is there any concern that the cap and trade market, as it matures, it's going to generate less money going forward?
It's interesting, Mark. When cap and trade was extended by the legislature in 2017, those auctions really stabilized quarter over quarter. You had great instability before they extended it until 2030, and then great stability after. The thing that occurred that nobody anticipated that really hurt one of the auctions last year was the global pandemic, COVID-19. When that struck, the market was hit, and we had a difficult May auction of 2020. But the auctions since then have been roaring back to stability and back to a more sort of constant increase. Our last auction, which was just last week, brought in $230 million for this project, which is an all-time high out of the auction. So
And how often are the auctions done?
They're quarterly, so they're 4 times a year.
Okay, so just to put it in perspective, you were generating, I believe, about $500 to $750 million a year from the auction. You're looking way ahead of that. It looks
Yeah,
like
we were our pace before COVID was about 720 a year. And then COVID hit, so our annualization number went down about 640. But the last 2 auctions have been extremely robust. We got hit really hard when COVID first struck, but since then it's really trending back.
You're getting close to $1 billion generating out of that. That's a lot of money. Let me ask you this: a last question. Sufficient funding to build this Bakersfield and Merced segment, $23 billion, I believe, by 2029. It's based on another premise, and that's that costs aren't going to continue to escalate. And listen, and costs have escalated. So how realistic is that assumption?
Well, this is what I would say about costs. I mean, this is a hard thing to describe to people, but it is true. It's been my experience. This project got off to such a start with early construction. There's so many unknowns about what was coming and what had to be considered as you build forward. We've now defined that work, so we know what we have in front of us. We have a budget in place to deal with the things that are in front of us on the 119. And then for the construction segments beyond that, we're just taking a different approach. We're going to design it first. We're going to identify the right-of-way, the utility relocations, and the third-party agreements that need to be done next. And then we'll get into construction contracts. We're going to do this in a much more methodical way going forward that I think will reduce, the risk, the uncertainty that we've been living with for this first segment.
Okay, I guess we will see on that. I want to thank Brian Kelly, the CEO of the High Speed Rail Authority. Up next, what do critics think of the High Speed Rail Authority's new business plan? Dan Walters from CalMatters up next. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. There are some who think that California's high-speed rail project has consistently been overpromised and underdelivered. Does High Speed Rail Authority's new business plan assuage any of their concerns? We welcome a frequent guest back to the Maddy Report, Dan Walters with CalMatters. Welcome, Dan.
Hello again.
Let's get right into it. So, one of the purported benefits of the high-speed rail project is lots of new construction jobs. You and others have challenged the employment touted by the High Speed Rail Authority, but let's assume, for sake of argument, that the employment impact is overstated. Isn't there something to be said about the economic impact of spending billions of dollars in one of the poorest regions in the state?
Well, of course, it has an economic impact of some kind. I mean, if you buy a pack of bubble gum, it has an economic impact of some kind. The real question is, what is the reason for having this project? If the reason for having this project is transportation, then it should be judged by that. It's like the old military bases. They say, well, the military bases have all these jobs. Well, no, the job of a military base is to defend the country. The job of the high-speed rail is to provide a better form of transportation. Whether it provides jobs or doesn't provide jobs should be of secondary or tertiary importance. And in fact, in this case, as shown in a recent LA Times article, very small portion of the monies being spent on high-speed rail actually finds its way into workers' pockets in the form of jobs. Only about 1,000 employees. That's not very much for the billions of dollars that have been spent. If it doesn't have a sound transportation rationale, and I don't believe it really does, then what's the point of doing it?
Well, let me ask you that.
1,000 jobs?
So some of the proponents have said, listen, we've spent vast amounts of money on subsidizing roads, subsidizing airports. Why not spend some money subsidizing passenger rail? And I'm also wondering if, the ongoing housing issue, affordable housing issue in California and the pandemic, and now the push toward telework, is it making high-speed rail more viable?
On paper, perhaps. On paper. But this project is barely off the paper. You have a few structures in Fresno area, Stonehenges, some people call them. But what do we got to show for all these billions of dollars that have been spent? It'll be there anytime soon. If everything goes right, someday you'll be able to travel from Merced to Bakersfield on a high-speed train. Okay? I mean, come on. Is that what this is all about?
Well, you pose
defies rationalization.
You pose a really good question. So what is it all about? Let me ask you this. It seems like the key question for the legislature is 2 questions. One is, what do we want to do? And how do we want to pay for it? What should be the answer?
they don't know what they want to do, and they don't know how to pay for it. That's the problem. This thing has now changed from a statewide high-speed rail system into a train running 130 miles or so down the valley. And they have no way of paying for expanding beyond that. Nothing on the horizon, despite years of trying to find some way of actually creating this statewide system. Nobody's come up with the idea, the way it can be done. It can't be done. In fact, the state can't even afford to pay for what it wants to build now. It's having to depend on cap and trade money. It's having to depend on federal handouts. It doesn't even have a viable plan to pay for the current project. It has no money in the bank to extend the project to Bakersfield or to Merced on the north. It's all supposition. It's all build it and they will come, or the money will show there somewhere, or Uncle Joe Biden will come up with the money. There's no plan there.
Well, there is 25% of cap and trade money that's going to high-speed rail. They had a hit in the most recent cap and trade auction, but actually last year, but most recently they did quite well in the cap and trade auction. They've been getting $250 to $500 million a year from cap and trade. The $1 billion the Trump administration tried to take back, claw back, Biden administration is likely to allow for high-speed rail. And if they keep the $4.2 billion in bond money and don't get it spent in LA and San Francisco, then maybe there is enough to get that 171-mile segment from Merced to Bakersfield. So let me ask you this last question very quickly. If you connect to the Merced-Bakersfield connection, and then you connect to the Altamont Corridor Express, so you can get from Bakersfield to San Jose more quickly, isn't that a benefit?
Well, is it much more quickly? You have to take a train from Bakersfield to Merced, a train from Merced to San Jose, a train from San Jose to San Francisco. Is it really an improvement? I don't think it really probably is much of an improvement. And it's one of those things people just have a hard time cutting their losses, saying that, hey, this isn't going to work out. So let's get it out. It's just a very difficult human tendency to keep on doing something on the hope that it'll all work out in the end. And I think the
military word is mission creep. Maybe that's the right word. I want to thank Dan Walters for being with us. Up next, we're going to hear from the other side of the issue, and that is with Tom Richards with the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board. That conversation in a moment. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Now, high-speed rail supporters are getting excited because I think they have a friend, Amtrak Joe, in the White House. In fact, a UC Berkeley professor called President Biden's infrastructure plan, quote, a lifeline for the system, unquote. What does the current chair of the High-Speed Rail Authority think of this new plan? We have him as our guest. Tom Richards, welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you very much.
So, Tom, what do you think?
Well, I think that the authority is encouraged by, once again, having a federal partnership with the White House. Looking at the legislation that the president is attempting to move forward with regards to the American Jobs Plan, we see tremendous promise for funding funding opportunities for high-speed rail. And clearly, his administration is focused on a direction of a national system of electrified rail. So with California's perspective on this, we are proud to be the only state in the country that is currently under construction on high-speed rail, and all Californians should be proud of that.
That's got to be an advantage that you've already got something in the pipeline, as it were. Nobody else does. But let me ask you this, though. Theoretically, there's funding in place to do the Merced-Bakersfield segment, the 171 miles by 2029. No additional federal funding is needed at this point. But that assumes that the California legislature isn't going to come in and try to divert some of that $4.2 billion state bond money. And you're already hearing noises from certain Southern California legislators that they're saying, spend the money in Southern California, or spend the money in the Bay Area with Bay Area legislators. Mm-hmm. We even have some Valley legislators who are unwittingly supporting that effort. What happens if we lose that $4.2 billion?
Well, Governor Newsom has proposed a significant transportation infrastructure plan, $11 billion, of which $4.1 billion is the funding that you've mentioned a moment ago that was the result of Proposition 1A, which was voter approved. Our hope certainly is that that will satisfy those people or those legislators who may be looking for other locations in which to spend money that's been allocated for high-speed rail.
Yeah, let's assume for sake of argument you're correct, and Governors has come out in support of keeping the $4.2 billion for high-speed rail in the valley. You've got the Altamont Corridor Express, which is going to be extended down to Merced, going all the way to San Jose. You build the valley segment from Merced to Bakersfield. You're going to see dramatically better service, passenger rail service from Bakersfield all the way up to the Bay Area, which is 2/3 of the state. All well and good, but it seems like the real high return on investment is that connection between Bakersfield and LA. I know it's very expensive because of the mountains and whatnot, but should we be focusing on that?
Well, I think we focus on what we've got funding for. And certainly we are improving dramatically the rail service in the Central Valley, both in terms of speed, with speeds on 171 miles from Merced to Bakersfield of over 200 miles an hour. We're grade separating 171 miles. The result, 18 trips a day instead of 8. That's currently provided by the San Joaquin service. A reduction of travel time in half, down to about 1 hour and 21 minutes on that 171 miles. With regards to Southern California, I think it really focused on what the entire project is. It's a statewide project connecting 3 major areas or geographic areas of California: the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley, along with Central Valley and Southern California. The net impact of that is that's how we maximize both the success and the value of high-speed rail. One works better with the other. Right now, the Central Valley is the recipient of the funds. It's where the trains will be tested, and it's where they will be certified, and it's where we have money to complete 171 miles up to Merced. So that service is critical for utilizing the funds that we've got in the best way and putting those assets into operation.
Well, let me ask you, we've only got about 30 seconds left. I want to ask you one last kind of important question. So there are critics who are saying that we're never going to see this built in our lifetime. Are we going to see an operating segment built by 2029?
We will. And we all look forward to that.
Okay, well, that's a pretty succinct answer. I want to thank Tom Richards, the chair of the High Speed Rail Authority, for joining us. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org. If you want to stay up to date on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.